Okay, I don't know if anybody's picked up the little handout thing that was sitting on the table, but if you didn't, if you got your phone, if you want to, you can scan that big one right there and you can get it. But what this handout is chronology of David's Psalms. You remember when we started this class, I said, you know, when we read the book of 2 Samuel, we're looking at David's life and how he was living. But once we look at the Psalms that he wrote during that time and kind of plug it in to the various points in his life, we can kind of get the heart of David. So we see in life what he's experiencing by reading the history. When we go to the Psalms, we start seeing the inner man of David. So what this list does is it kind of gives you a summation of the Psalms that he did write in the time frame in which they were written. So I thought it might be interesting. Sorry it took me so long to find this, but anyway, I did. And it's available if you want to download it. I'll have it. It's also on the website. If you go to the page that I've got where I've got all the videos listed at the top of the page, there's a link for resources. Click on that link and you can find it there. So I thought it was kind of interesting, and I thought it was something you guys might enjoy as you study through this book and maybe through David's life. He only wrote about 74, 75 Psalms, and I think we're all in that list. Anyway, so much for that. Chapter 13 of 2 Samuel continues the, I guess, illustrating the problems that David continues to face in his life. As we saw in the last chapter, God had pronounced his judgment upon David for the sins that he committed with Bathsheba. And now we're seeing in chapter 13 pretty much the unfolding of what the consequences of his sins were going to produce. We also see, I think, in chapter 13, a little bit about David as a father and maybe some of his attitude towards his children. And I think that's important for us to understand. David wasn't a perfect person. He had his faults, and we could see that in his children. And when we say that he was a man after God's own heart, I think we can look at David and see David was a man just like the rest of us. He had his good points and he had his bad points. But even though when he faltered or did something wrong, or if he misapplied his judgment, his intent, I think, was pure to most part. We may question that with Bathsheba. That was probably one of his biggest downfalls. But the inner man was constantly trying to strive after God. And we will see that in his Psalms as we, as you look at those, when you apply them to the chapters that we read. So in this particular chapter, chapter 13, we have the people in the context that we're going to be looking at. Of course, we'll have David, but his children, we have three of his children. We have Absalom, and we have Tamar, which was Absalom's sister. And they were the children of the wife that he married from the king of Geshur. Then we have Amnon, which was his firstborn, which was a child by another wife. Then we have Shimei or something like that, which was David's brother. And his son, Jonadab, which plays a kind of bad apple in this particular situation, at least this particular chapter. And then we have the king of Geshur, which was Ammihud, and his son Tamai. And they play, I think, a pivotal part in this role too. So locations in the context, of course, we have Jerusalem. This is where all the, I I guess the majority of or at least the first part of the chapter, the events happen. Then we have Baal Hazor, which was near Ephraim. And then we have the nation of Geshur, which is where Absalom fled to after he killed his brother. So if we were to look at that on the map, we see Jerusalem towards the bottom, and then Baal Hazor, which is where the death of Amnon happened. And that distance between the two is about 14, 15 miles. And then after Absalom kills his brother, he flees to Geshur, which is about 100 miles, 90 to 100 miles to the north of the country. So that's kind of where everything kind of comes into play. So when we look at the chapter, there's about 5 points that we need to consider. The first 19 verses deals with the incestuous rape of Tamar by Amnon. And then we have verses 20 to 22. David is angry when he hears about it, but yet we read that he doesn't do anything to avenge the crime. Then in 23 through 29, Absalom, Tamar's brother, plots the murder, and his servants carry out the deed and kill Amnon. And then verses 30 to 33, David believes all of his sons are dead, and he mourns for them, only to find out shortly thereafter that it was just his one son. And then after Amnon is killed, Absalom flees to Geshur for 3 years, and David longs to go to Absalom to see his son. Now, when we get into this chapter, we have to kind of understand, when we look at the events as they unfold, and the application of the law of Moses to these things. And we've seen these verses before, but there are actually, I think, 3 crimes committed in this particular chapter. And when I say crimes, or violations to the law of Moses. We see that Amnon committed 2 offenses against the law of Moses. And the first would be incest with his sister, which was prohibited in Deuteronomy chapter 27 and verse 22. And then we have the failure to follow the law concerning the humbling of a virgin. And these accounts are found in Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 28 and 29. And then a little bit more information is given in Exodus 22, verses 16 through 17. In that particular case, if the virgin is humbled and she's not betrothed to someone, then the man that did the act has to pay the father 50 shekels of silver, and then take the woman as his wife, and he's not allowed to divorce her. That was the law in Deuteronomy. But when we look at Exodus 22, verse 16 through 17, the same law is given, but a little bit more information. If the father refuses to give the woman to the man as his bride, that is his right. But he still receives the payment from the husband, from the man to the father. Now I will say this, and I don't know why, but these situations in the old law concerning the violation of unmarried women, and when we see that, the crime is only the payment of money, and then you're forced to marry her, and then you can do with her as you see fit, as long as it's not, you're not divorced. I don't know why the law was written that way. It seems like it is unjust to the woman. I mean, if that were to happen to my daughter, I think Amnon got the justice he needed, but he only got it two years late. That's just my opinion. But then, when I looked at God's laws, he did not consider this something worthy of death, but something that was worthy of some kind of penalty to the man. Whereas in today's society, if a man is guilty of that, he may be thrown in prison for 3 or 4 or 5 years, whatever it may be. So even today's laws, a situation like this is not justifiable for death. So I can see God looking at it the same way. But at the same time, he understands too that a woman in such a situation is not going to be considered, I'm not sure how to say that. He looks at the woman from the standpoint that in their particular time frame, someone who is not a virgin is considered less desirable than a woman that is not. and I guess God in a certain way was trying to take care of her. So, be that as it may, I don't know why the laws were written the way it was. Maybe something I have to do a little bit more study on. But we do see that the incest with the sister was a violation, and it appears that David did not follow up on applying the law. We're not told that in 2 Samuel 13, but it may have actually happened. We're just not told that information. So that may have been a violation, it may not. It may have actually been followed. Absalom committed at least one offense against the law of Moses, and that was the premeditated murder of his brother. And we've seen verses on that in Exodus chapter 21 and verse 14. Now, the chapter itself, make sure the thing doesn't flop over. The chapter itself begins with Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister named Tamar, and Amnon, which was David's firstborn son, loved her dearly. He was just so distressed over her that he just wasn't eating. As the Bible says, he was going thinner, and more sick every day. And it was improper for Amnon to do anything to her because of the fact that she was a virgin. Now, Amnon had a friend, and this friend was Jonadab, and he was, I guess, the nephew of David. His father was Shimei. David would be his uncle. So Jonadab came up with an idea for Amnon pretty much to have his way in this particular situation. And the Bible refers to him as a crafty person. He was kind of a devious guy. And if there was a situation or something that he wanted, he would probably dream up a way to take care of what the situation was, that he could get what he wanted. So he came up with this idea for Amnon, and he said, if you love her so much, here's what we can do. He said, go into your room, lie down in your bed, and pretend to be ill. You know, just pretend that you're sick. And call for your father and tell him that, you know, you're just on your deathbed, you just don't know what to do. And when he comes to you, tell him, you know, please have Tamar come, you know, to me and prepare food for me and feed me, and so that I may gain my strength and what, you know, and be better for it. And David, he did what he said, and David came and he told him, he said, please let Tamar, my sister, come that I may eat from her hand. Now David evidently didn't see any harm in this. And so he sent home for Tamar and said, go to your brother, prepare his food for him, and take care of him. Evidently, he said, you know, family's family, nothing to worry about here. So Tamar went to her brother's Amnon's house while he was laying down, and she took flour, kneaded it, made cakes in his sight, and baked the bread. And when it was placed before him, it says that he refused to eat. Now Amnon said, have everyone in the room go, you know, get out. All of his servants that were there, maybe tending to him, maybe the housekeeper said, get out, just leave me alone, just leave me with my sister. And so they left. Now when they left, Amnon said to his sister, please bring the food into the bedroom that I may eat from your hand. And I'm pretty much thinking, you know, she's thinking, you know, why can't he sit at the table like anybody else? But this is what he wanted. So she followed him into the bedroom and took the food with her. And I guess when she reached out to give it to him, he took hold of her and said, come and lie with me, sister. Now, I'm not sure what Amnon had in mind at this particular point. He probably had plan A and plan B. Plan A would be get with his sister, tell her his desire for her, and maybe she will have the same desire for him, and throw the concept of fornication sin out the window, and they just have a good old time that evening. But that was not the case. And I think Amnon's desire for her, or at least his love for her, was not really love in itself, because he was hoping that if the two were consensual in this, everything would probably work out down in the future for him. But this was not the case. But she refused him, and she said, no, my brother, do not force me. Do not do what this disgraceful thing. He said, where could I take my shame? And as for you, you would be like one of the fools of Israel. Now, she is probably trying to reason with him at this particular time. She said, don't force me. This should not be done in Israel. So she's pretty much telling him, what you're trying to do, commit fornication, is a sin in Israel, and this should not be done in God's country. He said, what you're trying to do is a disgraceful thing. It's disgraceful to you, and it would be disgraceful for me. Because if it does happen, where can I take my shame? There is no place that I can go in this world that I cannot alleviate the shame of what you're doing what you're planning on doing to me. He said, and if you do go through with this, you're nothing more than just one of the fools in this country. You're not using your wisdom, you're not using good sense. And if you are using good sense, she says, go to the king, and he will not withhold you from me. Now, I think it's kind of interesting here that she uses the phrase, go to the king, instead of saying, go to our father. And we'll probably come back on that in just a moment. But kind of keep that in mind. He says, speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. However, he would not heed her voice, and he being stronger than he forced her. So now we go from the point of she's not being consensual, then the plan B is we'll just overpower and just have my way and be done with it. And then after the whole thing was over with, it says that Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred that he hated her was greater than the love in which he had loved her. So he may have had genuine love for her beforehand, but when the love was not given to, was not returned to him in a consensual way, and then the act happened, Amnon, I think, got it in his mind, things will never be the way I want them to be. Now she despises me, she hates me, and I hate her for her not desiring me to begin with. So we're seeing now that what he considered love was nothing more than lust. Because true love will endure forever, and it'll overcome great obstacles. But this was not the case here. He did not really have love for her, he just had lust for her. And that was going to be his undoing. Now, he wouldn't listen to her. Then he says, arise and be gone. He said, just get out of my house and leave. But she wouldn't do it, because now she knew that the deed was done. Rectification had to take place. You had your way with me, now you need to follow the law of Moses, you need to take me for your wife. But he said, no, indeed, this evil of sending me away is worse than the other that you did to me. Not only to be defiled, now she's being cast away, and then she's going to have to bear the shame and the burden alone of what had happened to her. But he said, do not listen to me. And then he called his servant who was attending to her. He said, here, put out this woman out for me and bolt the door behind her. So now Amnon is trying to get his servants to think that she was the one that was doing the wrong deed, and he was casting her out and playing the innocent party and telling her to bolt the door so she can't come back in. So it's kind of like Amnon is now not only has had his way with her, he's disgusted because she didn't return his love to him. Now he's cast her out, and now he's not only shamed her, he's putting even more blame on her by trying to get people to think that she was the one that instituted this whole situation. And that was even worse than what he'd done to her. So he put her out, and it says that she had on a robe of many colors, for the king's virgin daughters wore such apparel. And the servant put her out, and after she left, she put ashes on her head, tore her robe with many colors that was on her, and laid her hand on her head and went away crying bitterly. She just had the worst day of her life. And Absalom, her brother, when he came and found her, it was kind of obvious that something was wrong. I mean, she had ashes on her head, her clothes were tore, she was crying, she was terribly upset. He probably had an idea that Amnon had his way with her. And so what he did, he told her to hold her peace. He said, do not take this thing to heart. He said, remain in my house, and try to get over this situation. It'll be rectified. Now in verse 21 it says, but when David heard of these things, he was very angry. That's all we have. That's all we have about David's response. Now, if David was angry, he could have done several things here. He could have disowned his son. He was probably, firstborn. He was entitled to a lot of the benefits of being the firstborn. He could have disowned his son, but he didn't. Now, what David could have done was looked at this situation. If he was aware of what the law of Moses said about it, he could have said, you need to pay me the 50 shekels of silver, but I refuse to give you her as your wife. Now, he had every right to do that, and that could have been a possible scenario that happened here. All that we know is that David was angry. Other than that, we can also assume that he didn't do anything. And if he didn't do anything, then David is probably thinking that what I did with Bathsheba is now happening in my own house. So, Absalom spoke to his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad. He didn't really say one thing or another bad about what had happened. He probably didn't even bring the situation up. For Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister. Now it came to pass 2 years later, Amnon's probably thinking, well, I got away with all this, everything is good in life, just like David thought with Bathsheba, a year later, everything is good in life. And Absalom came to this, he said 2 years later, he had some sheep shears down in Bel Hazor. We saw that up on the map. And this was located near Ephraim, about 15 miles from Jerusalem. So Absalom was going to have a shearing party. So he invited all of the king's sons, and even invited the king himself. He said, come down, shear the sheep with us, be with us while we're, bringing all the wool in for use. And he says, kindly note, your servant has sheep shearers. Please let the king and his servants go to your servant. Now we saw where Tamar referred to her father as the king. Now we're seeing Absalom referring to his father as his servant. So what does that tell us about the father, son, daughter relationships that we see here? I kind of get the picture that, David had 8 wives, 10 concubines, and they were probably in separate households. And he pretty much, I think, let the children be reared by the wives. He himself was taking care of the wars, taking care of ruling the kingdom, and pretty much stayed out of the picture. At least that's what I'm kind of gathering here. Because they don't approach David as their father. They approached him as a king, they approached him as his servant, and David was perfectly well with that. Now, with that kind of relationship between the father and his children, we can see how his children are doing what they are going to be doing for the rest of this book. So I'm kind of inclined to think that David may have been a man after God's own heart. He had good intentions, but he didn't do very well at raising his family. Now the king said to Absalom, no, let us not go now, we'll be a burden for you. Then he urged him, but he said, no, don't want to go, I'll just be in the way. But he blessed him. And then he said, if not, please let my brother Amnon go with us. Now David says, why should he go with you? Do you think he's kind of remembering what happened 2 years ago? And now he's asking Amnon to go off shear sheep? He's probably thinking, what kind of ulterior motive have you got going on here? But he probably didn't think the worst, because not only was Amnon going to be with Absalom, but all of his other sons were going to be there too. So he was probably thinking, there may be some roughing up going on, but he didn't think anything disastrous would come from it. So he said, let him go. And so he went. Now Absalom commanded his servants. He said, we're going to get Amnon drunk here. We're going to get him married, we're going to get him happy and in a festive mood. And watch very closely, because when he gets in this situation where he's just unable to defend himself, then you guys jump on him and kill him. And he also says, do not be afraid, for have I not commanded you? but be courageous and valiant. Now, the servants were probably thinking, Absalom wants us to kill Amnon, the king's son. Now, what's the king going to do to us? And Absalom probably told him, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it, between me and David. He said, just be strong and be valiant, because what Amnon did is worthy of death, in my opinion. So they jumped on him and they killed him. And when the other king's sons saw what was going on, they fled. Now, I was thinking, why would they do that in this particular situation instead of going to their brother's aid? Well, we don't know how many servants that Absalom had at this particular shearing. He may have had 50 men. And so they probably feared for their own lives. If his servants are killing the king's son, they're probably going to turn on us after they're done with him. So they fled the situation, they fled the scene, and got away as fast as they could. Now, word had gotten back to David that all of his sons had been killed, and that just devastated David. And he was mourning, he tore his garments. His servants were there with him. They tore their garments in mourning over the loss of his sons, until good old Jonadab came to him and said, no, just your one son, Amnon, is dead. He said, don't worry. He said, the rest of your sons are good, are still alive. Take the thing to heart, and think that, don't worry. It's not as bad as you think it is. You just lost one out of many. And he was comforting David in that respect. Now, this, I think, is interesting, because all of this happened because of Jonadab's craftiness with Amnon to begin with. If this man would have kept his mouth shut, this whole scene probably wouldn't have even unfolded as it did. But it did, and now he's acting like, I'm doing the king a favor. I'm trying to comfort the king, even though I'm the one responsible for his daughter being violated by his son, and his son being killed by his half-brother. That's, to me, it's hypocrisy in its greatest sense. Now, Absalom fled, and the young man who was keeping watch lifted his eyes and looked, and there were many people come from the hillside behind him. And he said, look, the sons are coming. Now, when Absalom fled, he fled to Geshur. Now, think about Absalom's servants that had just killed the king's son. They were pretty much left holding the bag. Who's going to stand up for us now? All of the other king's sons saw us rise up and kill Amnon, and the one man that was probably going to be the one thing to keep us from facing certain death from the king has now fled the country. They were probably not very happy, and I don't know if their lives were spared or not, but I'm sure David had something to say about their future in this situation. But the king's sons came, and they all lifted up their voices and wept, and the king and their servants wept bitterly. It says Absalom fled and went to Talmai, which was the son of the king Amnon of Geshur, and it says that David mourned for his son every day. And so Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there for 3 years, and King David longed to see Absalom, for he had been comforted concerning Amnon because he was dead. Now, this again, I don't know how to take David's reaction to this, or how David actually felt. But for a father to have one son kill another son and then mourn because the one that did the murder is not with him, and that his spirit was wanting to be with his son, is beyond me. Again, the only thing I can come back to is relate the father-son relationship that they didn't have. And he probably wished he should have had. And maybe in David's sight too, is that, he's seen a lot of death in battles and in wars. And to him, maybe death is just a fact of life. And he probably looked at Amnon losing his life at the hand of Absalom as being, to a certain extent, justified for what he did. So he may have, forgiven Absalom for what he did to his brother, and let that, I guess, be the point of comfort. So when we look at all of this, it's a very devastating scene in David's family. He's lost a son, his daughter's been violated, and another son is out in exile. And David is thinking, why is all this happening? It was because God said the sword would not depart from your house, and that you would be, even though I may have put away your sins with Bathsheba, the consequences of your act you cannot overcome. They're going to be there. So I think we're seeing the raising of the sons, his daughters by David, the way he acted as a father, kind of left his children on their own to do as they saw fit in their own eyes. And simply because they were the king's children, they could get away with a lot more than the average person did. So, when I looked at this, there was a few lessons that I had learned from it. First of all, don't keep crafty friends, because they will most certainly lead you into trouble. If you've got friends that are bad apples, then I can just pretty much guarantee they're going to drag you into whatever trouble they want to get into. And these people are quick to point out, or at least devise plans. They say, this is going to be fun to do, or this is going to be great to do, and you'll just fall right into it and suffer severe consequences. Secondly, love is not lust. That should say love endures. That's what happens when you type too fast and don't go back and double check yourself. You know, as crazy as it is, I do double check myself. I triple check, but I still find myself kind of, when I put this lesson together, I'm gonna be honest with you. You know what I had trouble with Joab and Abner, getting these two guys mixed up? I was getting Amnon and Absalom mixed up. I had to go back in there and change their names around in the proper places. So, you know, I may be smart with those little square things you can click with your phone, but I have a tendency to jump over words. Love is not lust. And love endures, but lust does not. And love will overcome a lot of obstacles in life, but a person that lusts after something will not allow anything to stand in his way for him to achieve his desires. Never allow yourself to be alone in an uncompromising position. And this is what happened to Tamar. She probably didn't realize it at first because it was her brother. But we should never allow ourselves to be in any kind of uncompromising position. We also have to understand that people, I guess, I don't know if you say by nature, but people can be vengeful. But Christians knows that vengeance belongs to God. So if something were to happen to you in your life, we should not seek to go out and get justification for it by our own hand. We should leave that in the hands of God. You know, I think Paul is a prime example of that. He was beaten and stoned many a times. He was abused, and he understood that these people, if they would not repent of their ways, God would bring vengeance upon them in the day of the Lord. And then finally, never be the one held responsible for another person's wrongdoing. I think this is what happens to Absalom's servants. They found themselves in a position that we did Absalom's dirty work for him, just like David had Joab do his dirty work in killing Uriah the Hittite. But we should never be the one holding the bag, so to speak, for someone else's deeds done in this life. So be careful with people that we choose to be our friends, and we need to be careful with things that are done to us, how we find our justice, and finally, don't be found responsible or faced with the judgment of the law or somebody else because of someone else's undoing. Question, comments?
Ted.
Yes, sir.
So I would assume that Absalom had a sister named Tamar, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I
Yes, I believe so.
So it's two different people.
I'd have to go back and look at the genealogy line, but I think that is correct.
You get into it in the next chapter, so that's what I'm asking.
You know, I was gonna put the genealogy back up here for us to kind of refresh our minds about where all these people, you know, how they all line up. It probably wouldn't hurt for us, you know, to do that, because now we're beginning to see family squabbles and some of the problems that's going to arise. Now, Absalom, David may have longed for Absalom, but when Absalom came back, he had other plans. And it seems like David forgave him for what he did, and then he turns around and we'll see what he does to David in retrospect. Any other questions? Comments? Y'all reading the book? Is it helpful? Is it enlightening? I kind of wonder, you know, when I chose the book for us to read, I got to thinking, you know, I could have an outline for you, or I could have, you know, a series of questions, but the book's kind of short, chapters are kind of short, and he does give a lot of good thought as you go through the book, especially these last two chapters. He's just late. You know, if I were to go into detail of what he went into, we'd be here for the rest of the rest of the year. Some of the things that he brings up. So I kind of thought that if you read the book, followed the verses that he applies to some of the situations and some of the comments that he makes about making this application in their life, you'll do good by that. And it's a book that you can keep and read again down the road. Anyway, that's all I've got, and we'll go into chapter 14 next Sunday morning.